I walked into the 10 a.m. meeting last week, and I knew instantly it wasn't anything obvious, just quiet. Too quiet. Sarah, who always jokes with Mark, was at the opposite end of the table, meticulously organizing her pens. Mark himself was just staring at his blank laptop screen like he was trying to burn a hole in it. When the boss came in, his good morning team was about half an octave higher than usual, a little too bright. I could feel the tension like static electricity in the air. I leaned over to my colleague next to me and whispered, "What's going on?" He just gave me this completely blank look. "What do you mean? It's just a meeting." The entire hour felt like everyone was reading from a bad script. Everyone agreed too quickly. No one made eye contact. 3 days later, the email went out. Department restructuring. Mark was gone. Everyone acted shocked. But the thing is, I wasn't. And that's the loneliest feeling in the world. That feeling of seeing the ghost in the room that everyone else swears isn't there. That opening anecdote, and I bet, many of you listening have felt something similar, maybe sensed a shift way before it became obvious. It just perfectly captures what we're diving into today, that feeling, seeing the ghost in the room. Well, that's not just you being paranoid or having some vague hunch. It's actually superior pattern recognition in action, a really advanced skill. It lets you rapidly pull together all these subtle, tiny data points, the organized pens, the tight voice, the way no one meets your eye, and just synthesize them instantly. You see this high probability outcome that everyone else is just denying, or maybe actively avoiding. So today, we are doing a serious deep dive. We're looking into the actual mechanics of this skill. We're digging into the hard neurological proof that it exists, how it fits into our whole cognitive setup, and maybe the toughest part, we're exploring the really high social cost, the organizational cost of being that person, the early warner, the one who speaks the truth nobody wants to hear.
Yeah, and what's really striking is that core conflict you mentioned, this intense friction between having this really sharp internal perception, that high-level intuition, that pattern recognition, and then facing an external reality, maybe an organization or even just another person that tries to dismiss it or invalidate it. Or, frankly, sometimes just gaslight you about what you're seeing. And we're seeing more and more evidence that this ability, this knack for connecting seemingly unrelated dots is absolutely critical. Think about national security analysts spotting subtle geopolitical shifts.
Right, or even medical diagnostics. Catching something others miss.
Exactly. So our mission here is to peel back those layers, look at the cognitive nuts and bolts, the neurological evidence that actually backs this up through expert performance. And then, tackle the really painful side, the organizational psychology, the emotional fallout when that early warner actually tries to sound the alarm.
Okay, so it sounds like we're really elevating pattern recognition. It's not just some soft skill, some nice to have. We're talking about something measurable, verifiable, part of our mental architecture. Let's unpack that. Let's start with the mind itself, because the evidence seems to suggest this isn't guesswork. It's a highly structured cognitive ability.
Precisely. And to really get a handle on high-level pattern recognition, you have to start with metacognition. It's the foundation. Researchers, like Flavel back in the day, defined metacognition as having these two crucial parts that work together: monitoring and regulating.
Monitoring and regulating.
Monitoring is basically knowing what you know, being aware of your own thoughts, your own understanding,
right,
or lack thereof. Regulating is the active part. It's controlling how you learn, how you adapt, how you apply what you know, or figure out what you need to know.
Right. And the sources we looked at suggest that superior pattern recognition isn't just using these components. It actually operates across multiple levels of sophistication. It's not just like an on-off switch. There's this model mentioned, the 8 layers model of metacognition, which sounds complex, but the idea seems powerful. It suggests cognitive processes aren't just static functions. They get more refined.
That structure is absolutely essential when you're analyzing expertise.
Yeah.
According to this model, basic cognitive processes, things like attention, memory, perception, and definitely pattern recognition, they just show more advanced, more refined qualities at each higher level. Think of the lower layers as dealing with simple, concrete stuff, like you realize you misspelled a word as you type it and you just instantly fix it. That's low-level monitoring and regulation.
Okay, so recognizing a stop sign is low layer. Easy. A higher layer then must be way more abstract, right?
Yeah.
Seeing the bigger picture.
Exactly. The higher layers are dealing with much more abstract systems-level thinking. That's where you might realize, say, that an entire company culture is just fundamentally resistant to any kind of real change. Or maybe you see a geopolitical situation starting to unravel based on, I don't know, 3 conflicting economic reports and 1 slight shift in diplomatic language. That whole hierarchy describes this increasingly abstract, unified, higher-order control system. Pattern recognition at those levels is less about just reacting to what's there.
And more about projecting, seeing where things are headed.
Precisely. It becomes predictive.
So what does that refinement actually look like? What are these higher layers doing differently than, say, a novice brain?
They're performing these really crucial regulating functions. They're actively adapting the processes involved in how we even build knowledge. So think about the processes underlying how we encode information, how we reactivate memories, consolidate them, integrate new knowledge with old. The higher layers manage all that. Imagine your brain is like a super complex filing system. A novice might just shove every piece of paper in, maybe in chronological order. The expert uses these higher layers to regulate how they organize everything. They toss out what's irrelevant, they cross-reference the critical bits, they manage strategies like rehearsal, coding, using mental imagery. It all becomes incredibly streamlined and efficient.
Okay, let's loop that back to the opening story. The person feeling the meeting tension. Their high-level metacognition wasn't just noticing Sarah tidying her pens. It was maybe tagging that as, like, potentially minor if it was alone. But then instantly integrating it, consolidating it with the data point of the boss's weirdly high-pitched voice.
Right.
Comparing that consolidated picture to maybe thousands of stored memories of other tense meetings, previous layoffs, and integrating all of that into one unified predictive hypothesis. Someone's getting fired. A layoff is coming. That whole process, integrating across those layers, that abstraction, that's the core of superior pattern recognition.
Yes, exactly. It's the speed and the accuracy of that abstraction, that synthesis, that really differentiates the expert from the novice.
That cognitive explanation feels really solid. But, we need the science, the hard proof. Let's zoom right into the brain. We need to see evidence. This isn't just theory. And we can do that by looking at expert performance in really complex tasks that absolutely demand high-speed pattern recognition, like chess. The sources use the ELO reading system, which is, a standard way to measure relative skill to separate the experts, the grandmasters, from the novices, the beginners.
And when you put these different groups into fMRI scanners while they're thinking about chess positions, the results are, well, they're pretty groundbreaking. You see clear physical differences in how their brains are functionally connected compared to novices. This really proves that superior pattern recognition isn't just about learning rules, it actually shapes the brain's architecture over time.
So what exactly changes? Where's the neurological upgrade happening?
Okay, one of the really big findings is about enhanced functional connectivity, specifically between the posterior middle temporal gyrus, let's call it the PMTG, and other brain areas. Areas involved in planning actions and processing visual information.
Okay.
What this means is, for the expert, the visual input, seeing the board, doesn't take this long, slow detour through perception, then analysis, then planning, then action. It's like the visual perception is already hyper-connected to the potential plan. It forms an almost immediate loop.
Wow, that enhanced connection speaks directly to that speed we were talking about, that instantaneous synthesis, the prediction.
Absolutely. And there's more. The collateral sulcus, or CoS, in experts, shows much stronger connections to regions involved in spatial perception and navigation.
Ah, so they literally see the board differently.
Yes. This superior connectivity directly reflects their ability to see the board not just as, 32 pieces on squares, but as a dynamic, interconnected spatial landscape. They perceive the relationships between the pieces almost instantly, which allows them to anticipate moves maybe several steps ahead, often without conscious, deliberate calculation.
Okay, but here's the part that really blew my mind.
Yeah.
The link between the object and the action.
Yes, the right PMTG seems to play this preferential role in linking object identity with potential actions. Think about what that means. The expert sees a specific piece, the object identity, say, it's a rook, and their brain instantaneously retrieves the optimal set of potential actions for that rook in that specific spatial context on the board.
No delay.
Exactly. There's no measurable lag between seeing the piece and generating the best possible moves for it. It's the absolute hallmark of expertise. And look, this isn't some mystical intuition. It's dedicated, enhanced neurological wiring that basically merges seeing and doing. We also see increased functional connectivity pattern homogeneity in another area, the anterior middle temporal gyrus, the AMTG, which just further underscores that these expert brains are fundamentally wired for unified, fast, integrated data processing.
That is just incredibly clear neural proof. Pattern recognition isn't fuzzy guesswork. It's about building these super efficient neurological highways, dedicated pathways merging perception and action. It takes intuition out of the realm of psychology almost and puts it right into measurable neuroscience. You can see it on a scan. Okay, let's take that idea of visual expertise and shift it away from a game, even a complex one like chess, to a place where the stakes are literally life and death, medical diagnostics. Specifically, let's talk about radiology. This requires that same advanced ability to pick out the signal from all the noise.
Definitely. In high-stakes fields like radiology, visual expertise isn't just about looking at the whole image. It's about refining what you pay attention to. A novice might scan everything sort of equally. The expert radiologist, drawing on years of experience, is already pre-selecting critical features. Their brain is effectively tuned to ignore the visual static. And this expertise actually modulates the brain's network dynamics, allowing for that super refined feature selection.
This sounds exactly like that high-level metacognitive control we discussed earlier, but applied to the physical act of looking. The expert's cognitive framework is actively stripping away the irrelevant stuff to zero in on the pure signal.
Precisely. And to illustrate just how refined this process is, we can look at a concept from machine learning that actually mirrors this focused pattern recognition. It's called recursive feature elimination with SVM, or RFE-SVM. It's a technique. The core idea is that the algorithm recursively eliminates the least useful features in a dataset, basically, the noise, until the features that remain achieve the highest classification accuracy. So in this context, the correct diagnosis.
Wait, hang on. So the computer model is literally trying to copy the expert human mind by systematically throwing out irrelevant data until it finds the best set of clues that point to the right answer.
That's the perfect parallel, intellectually speaking, yes. It shows that true expertise, whether you're a grandmaster, a geopolitical analyst looking for those subtle shifts, or a radiologist scanning an X-ray, is often defined less by how much information you absorb, and more by your highly refined ability to eliminate the least useful features. You filter ruthlessly until only the pure high-value pattern is left. A novice tends to hoard information, right? An expert filters it, almost instinctively.
So back to our opening meeting story again. The low-value features might have been Sarah's pens, maybe just a nervous habit, a distraction. But the high-value features that survived the filter were the boss's strained voice, the total lack of eye contact, Mark staring into the void. The high PR brain sort of intuitively used these RFE-SVM principles, cut through the mundane details, isolate the predictive pattern. Change is coming. That process of elimination. Yeah, that really does feel like the peak of cognitive regulation. Okay, so if the chess master's brain is wired to instantly link seeing the queen to making the right move, what happens when someone with superior pattern recognition sees, I don't know, an organizational train wreck coming, or a societal problem brewing, and that recognized pattern demands action? Often difficult, inconvenient action. This takes us out of the clean lab setting and right into the messy world of human systems.
And that's exactly where the friction ignites.
Yeah, a high PR individual's insight often functions like an early warning system. They pick up on the subtle signals maybe indicating toxicity in a team, or those geopolitical shifts we mentioned, or even predicting relationship failure. You know, in national security intelligence, that's literally their job. Connect the subtle dots before they become obvious threats. The huge challenge, though, is always communication and validation. How do you get others to see what you see?
But don't organizations, leaders, always say they value early warnings? Innovation, seeing around corners. Is the pushback really just about lacking proof? Or is it something deeper, like ego, inconvenience, fear of change? It's very often the latter. The high PR insight is inherently tough to validate in the moment. Why? Because it often lacks that immediate, tangible, slam-dunk proof. It's built on processing subtle data points, the non-obvious shifts everyone else either missed or maybe chose to ignore. So the high PR person has to try and communicate this predictive synthesis to policymakers or maybe organizational leaders who are usually demanding hard numbers, measurable evidence, not advanced pattern interpretation. And when that truth is painful or implies a lot of work is needed, like restructuring a department, admitting a strategy failed the system, the organization often just defaults to avoiding the message. And sometimes the messenger too. This creates this really difficult systemic tension, right? The high PR person sees what's coming because their brain is wired to efficiently integrate these subtle, seemingly disconnected pieces of data. The organization often rejects the warning because, well, They haven't experienced that future yet. And admitting the pattern is real means facing immense painful effort right now. Avoidance feels easier. Hashtag 2.2, navigating toxic organizational avoidance.
Okay, let's make this concrete. Let's pivot to the organizational cost using that scenario, the lunchroom theft scapegoat. That story was powerful. The protagonist in that situation immediately saw it wasn't just about missing lunch money, it was a sign of a deeper systemic failure.
Yeah, that situation's a perfect little microcosm of organizational weakness, isn't it? The boss is clearly under pressure, maybe from higher-ups, maybe budget cuts, who knows. But they need a quick fix, a clean resolution. So they prioritize the path of least resistance, which in this case is to quietly let suspicion fall on the protagonist, the convenient scapegoat. It's easier than launching a messy, difficult, potentially embarrassing internal investigation that would demand real accountability, real time, real effort.
And the high PR person sees that pattern instantly. They recognize the boss's quick solution isn't about justice at all. It's basically operational cowardice, covering their own back.
Precisely. And this dynamic spirals very quickly into what we call perceptual gaslighting. And this is a really specific, loaded term in organizational psychology. It's not just garden variety lying. It's when the toxic environment actively, systematically denies the obvious, observable truth. So in this case, the thefts continue. The pattern of missing funds is crystal clear. But the organization driven by fear, convenience, avoidance refuses to acknowledge the pattern, refuses to see the ongoing systemic failure. Instead, the person who points out the pattern or who gets blamed for it, the scapegoat, is made to feel like they are the problem. They're told, maybe not in words, but through actions, your perception is wrong. Your discomfort is the real issue here. You're being disruptive.
So how does someone even maintain their sanity, let alone their dignity, when their reality is being actively denied like that?
Well, the protagonist's response in that source material is actually a masterclass in setting boundaries under pressure. Notice they didn't just lash out defensively, which, the organization might have secretly been hoping for, right? To justify their narrative.
Literally ammunition.
Yeah, exactly. Instead, they wrote a clear, calm, factual statement, asserting their integrity, their dignity, while formally requesting fairness. This is a crucial strategic move. It's a very clear boundary assertion. It's a refusal to internalize the lie the system wants them to swallow. They're essentially saying, nope, I will not participate in your convenient fiction, and I am documenting the objective truth right here.
So they weren't really fighting to win the argument in that moment, maybe knowing they couldn't. They were fighting to preserve their own truth, their own dignity, which, as you said, might be the only thing you can protect when you're inside a toxic avoidance system. Hashtag 2.3, the cost of inaction versus integrity.
And the sources reveal something really profound that actually pushed the protagonist to finally make that stand. A moral consequence. They realized that their initial silence, their attempt to just keep their head down, keep the peace, ride out the storm, it wasn't passive at all. It actually made them complicit in a dynamic where their friend, the one responsible for restocking the inventory, was secretly covering the losses, paying out of her own pocket, trying to protect the protagonist.
Wow, okay, that changes everything, doesn't it? The ethical calculation just flips completely. The second you realize your own attempt at self-preservation, your restraint, is actively causing harm to someone innocent, especially someone trying to protect you. Well, inaction suddenly becomes morally indefensible.
It absolutely does. And the core insight here, especially for high PR individuals, is incredibly profound, I think. Integrity isn't just about not doing the wrong thing yourself. That's part of it, obviously. But it's also about not letting other people suffer because you're too afraid to rock the boat, too afraid to challenge the toxic status quo. The high PR individual often faces this agonizing choice first because they see the full scope of the harm. They see the chain of complicity, how the system protects itself. So the choice becomes, do I stay quiet, keep the peace, and let someone else absorb the cost? Or do I speak the painful truth and risk becoming the immediate target myself?
And then, when the organization inevitably escalated, actually demanding the protagonist pay for these thefts they didn't commit, the ultimate stand was taken, refusing to accept the guilt, refusing to pay, and then using strategic silence after they had already asserted the documented truth.
Yes, that sequence is critical. Assert the facts once, clearly, calmly, maybe in writing, and then you shift the dynamic. You use strategic silence. It puts the burden of the next move squarely back onto the accuser, onto the organization. By refusing to internalize the shame, refusing to perform guilt for something they didn't do, the protagonist demonstrated this incredibly strong internal locus of control. They basically force the organization's hand, either formally accuse them, which would require evidence they didn't have, or tacitly admit the whole investigation was a sham, thereby exposing the boss's failure. It's a really powerful move, just standing firm on the ground of objective reality when everyone else is trying to push you off it.
Okay, we've covered the organizational pushback pretty thoroughly, but the sources also really highlight the severe emotional toll this takes, often in our closest relationships. That feeling of recognizing a painful pattern in a relationship, but having it completely denied by the person you're closest to. It's described in the material as feeling quarantined in cloud cuckoo land. Just this sense of deep confusion, real emotional turmoil.
Yeah, that feeling is the direct psychological cost of having your clear perception invalidated, denied. When a high PR individual points out a problem could be systemic, could be relational, especially if it requires the other person to change or admit they're wrong, the reaction is often intense defensive hostility. And it's crucial to understand, the rejection of the pattern usually isn't because the data is faulty. It's because the recipient prefers the immediate comfort of a lie, or just avoidance, over facing a painful truth that demands effort or change.
And this defensive hostility often shows up as defensive escalation, right? We see this when someone who's maybe deeply insecure or very conflict avoidant gets confronted, even gently, like the example of the friend sharing really disturbing, violent fantasies about their awful boss. And the high PR listener just expresses some care, some concern about the friend's emotional state, like, wow, that sounds really intense. Are you okay? And the friend, instead of hearing the care, just doubles down, gets even more graphic, maybe even angry at the listener for bringing it up.
That's the core relational dynamic we really need to grasp here. The initial intent, which might be genuine concern or care, or even just a healthy boundary assertion, is immediately experienced by the defensive person as something else entirely. They feel it as emotional abandonment or judgment or criticism. They feel accused of being flawed or damaged or wrong. So they lash out. It's pure ego protection. Or protecting their preferred narrative about themselves. They aren't actually processing the content of the message, the truth being offered. They're reacting to the perceived threat to their self-concept. Suddenly, the person who saw the pattern and tried to offer help or insight becomes the enemy, the threat.
Okay, but the sources detail something even more insidious. A truly relationship-destroying deflection tactic, especially in intimate relationships. Say one partner identifies a clear pattern of maybe deceit, like being really secretive about texting an ex-partner constantly. The high PR person finally brings it up, names the issue. Look, this secrecy, it's really damaging my trust in us.
And this is where the psychological warfare can really begin. It's brutal. Instead of addressing the actual pattern, the secrecy itself, the potential boundary violation, the defensive partner executes a complete reversal of responsibility, a flip. They will accuse the partner who spoke up, the vulnerable one, of not trusting them. Or they'll accuse them of being motivated by jealousy or trying to control their healing process or their personal space or their friendships.
That is just such a profoundly isolating tactic, isn't it? It completely weaponizes the vulnerability of the person who is brave enough to speak the truth. The person trying to bring honesty and maybe fix something in the relationship is suddenly put on trial for having perfectly normal human feelings.
Exactly. That deflection is the emotional equivalent of slamming a door shut in the face of truth and then bolting it from the other side. The defensive partner successfully paints the person who identified the pattern, the one who was trying to be transparent, trying to preserve the connection, as the villain, simply for feeling hurt or wanting inclusion or needing honesty. It is a fundamental boundary violation because it actively punishes honesty and vulnerability. It sends the message, don't you dare bring up uncomfortable truths. And the long-term damage here is devastating. The partner who was initially hurt, who saw the pattern, is now forced to question themselves. Was I being unreasonable? Am I too insecure? Maybe I am the problem here. This tactic is specifically designed to induce shame and guilt, to shut down any further discussion or inquiry, make the truthful partner retreat. And of course, this guarantees the toxic pattern, whatever it was, can continue completely unchecked. Because vulnerability, trying to address it, has been effectively shut down and penalized. Hashtag tag 3.3 self-worth and boundary setting.
So given all this potential pushback, the organizational gaslighting, the relational deflection, the emotional toll, what are the personal tools? What does the high PR individual need to actually survive this, to thrive without being constantly burned by their own clarity? How do you protect that internal compass, that sense of truth?
I think the absolute cornerstone is they need to solidify their personal self-worth completely outside of their ability to help or fix or save other people or systems. It's a risk, actually. Individuals with high pattern recognition often also have high emotional intelligence. And that combination can sometimes lead towards codependency. They risk deriving their sense of value solely from being the one who understands, the one who guides, the container for other people's problems.
Right.
But healthy relationships, healthy systems should be mutually supportive. Your self-worth has to be intrinsic. It cannot depend on external validation or your success rate in fixing someone else's issues.
That's critical.
Yeah.
Because the high PR person needs that internal solidity to clearly recognize boundary violations when they happen, whether they're big, like the scapegoating, or seemingly small. Let's use that low-stakes example from the sources. The friend who constantly criticizes how much you spend on, say, a laundry service.
Right. That behavior maybe is driven by the friend's own financial anxieties, sure, but it's still an intrusive pattern. The pattern being recognized isn't really about the cost of laundry. It's the consistent pattern of intrusive commentary that subtly, or maybe not so subtly, belittles the other person's choices, their autonomy.
And the high PR person needs the clarity and the self-worth to set that limit, even when the behavior is coming from someone they genuinely care about. You can't let the fear of rocking the boat, that desire to keep the peace, stop you from protecting your own internal reality, your own dignity. The stand might seem small, maybe just firmly saying, hey, that commentary about my finances, it needs to stop. But the clarity and self-respect behind it are immense.
Ultimately, whether you're dealing with a dysfunctional organization or a difficult relationship, the high PR individual has to understand. Your role isn't necessarily to force others to see the truth you see. That might be impossible. Your primary responsibility is to maintain your own strong internal locus of control. Maintain your grip on reality. If you refuse to internalize the lie, refuse to absorb the shame or the blame being projected onto you, then the toxicity surrounding you cannot ultimately define or damage your core self. You've done your part. You identified the pattern. You asserted the truth. The responsibility for how that truth is received or ignored then falls squarely back onto the system or the other individual.
That really brings it all together. We started with that quiet, almost invisible tension in a meeting. We journeyed through the actual enhanced neural wiring of expert perception, seeing it in the fMRI scans of chess masters, understanding the filtering principles like RFE, SVM, and diagnostics. And we landed right in the middle of the emotional, social battlefield you face when you dare to speak an inconvenient truth.
Yeah, superior pattern recognition is undeniably this sophisticated, layered cognitive skill. It's validated by neuroscience. It genuinely allows some individuals to perceive the underlying structure of reality more clearly, more quickly. But its actual utility in the social world is constantly challenged. Challenged by systems, by organizations, by individuals who fundamentally prefer a comforting lie, or just emotional avoidance, or maybe those weaponized defenses, prefer that over facing painful truths that demand difficult change.
And here's the final thought, maybe the most crucial takeaway for you listening. The most painful part of speaking truth to power, or truth in a relationship, is often realizing the rejection you face isn't about your data being wrong. It's not that your pattern recognition failed. It's usually about the other person or the organization prioritizing their own comfort, their own avoidance over reality. And remember that common damaging defensive tactic, accusing the truthful person of being motivated by jealousy or control or insecurity, effectively turning the messenger, the one who saw the pattern, into the problem they were trying to address. You absolutely have to be prepared for that reversal. And maybe, just maybe, recognize that defensiveness itself as the ultimate confirmation that your pattern recognition was right all along.